Alright guys, take a seat at the computer. Aaron, go right ahead. Okay, we're going to minimize that real fast. Okay, so we're going to do a little presentation. It's about music history. It's called Music Through the Ages. And it's to help you guys learn kind of how music happens in order throughout history, where it starts and where we're kind of at right now. So this is what this presentation is kind of about. We also give you examples about, you know, what kind of music is from each era. Okay, so all you gotta do is hit the arrows to go to the next one. This is where we start.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay, go ahead and hit the arrow again. It takes a little bit. Alright, so our very first era is the medieval era, and it's between the years 500 current era and 1400 current era. It's the first musical era recorded in history, at least in Western music. And that's what we mainly focus on because that's what influences American music the most is music from Europe and music from Russia. So that's kind of what we focus on the most for music history. Some characteristics of medieval music, you're listening to kind of some melodies that don't always like sound like they're going anywhere. They kind of wander and they seem kind of spacey. And the best way I kind of can describe that is they just kind of feel like they're just kind of wandering around. Have you guys ever heard any medieval music? Do you guys know what that kind of sounds like? Yeah? Okay. What are some things that you notice about it?
Yeah, that it doesn't really have a flow.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of just, it gives you this mood, this overall sort of quality to it. Mm-hmm. And another thing that's present in it is this low drone. It's typical of a lot of medieval songs. There's this single bass note that's pretty much held throughout the entire thing.
So is this like Ren Fair music?
Close. Where we will actually get to Renaissance era. That's next. Oh. This is like pre-Renaissance era. So it's a little bit different in the sense that there's some instrumental music in the medieval era, but a lot of it is chant. A lot of it is basically music that wasn't, if you can see that page right there, that's the YouTube video that we're going to listen to of it. It is actually kind of written in a way that makes it a little bit like different than the music that we see today. They kind of give like a reference of what they're supposed to sing rather than exact notes. So really a lot of it is ad-libbing, which is kind of cool because this brings me to my next point. Early medieval music was monophonic. Do you guys have any idea what that might mean? Any guesses?
One phone.
Yeah, you're on the right track. So think
one sound.
Yeah, okay, so it means one, but it means like one line, one voice.
Oh, okay.
So like it's a bunch of voices, but they're all singing the same thing.
Oh, okay.
Is essentially the idea.
Okay.
So no harmonizing.
Yeah, no. It doesn't. That polyphonic, which is basically parts that are different from one another. Not always harmonies. Harmonies are a little bit different, but parts that just aren't unison. That comes a little bit later in this era, but really it just starts out monophonic. So this is an example. Yeah, this is an example of medieval chant. I want you guys to answer: is it listening to it if it's polyphonic or monophonic?
Does the drone count as
the drone
polyphonic?
count?
No, the drone's just
okay.
Yeah, the drone.
So then it's monophonic. Actually, no, it does. No. It does. You're right. It's
polyphonic. If you listen a little bit more carefully, there's some other voices in there other than the main kind of voice. Another interesting thing about medieval music, you can go ahead and stop it, Aaron.
Okay.
The pause button's in the bottom.
I'm trying to get.
Yeah, the mouse is kind of messed up. But yeah, a big thing about medieval music of that time was that it only often came in like 3 parts, and it was always sung by men. There were like no female parts.
Oh, okay.
So you had maybe like 2 upper parts and oh geez. It's not exiting. What? Let's see if we can fix this. Here, hit the escape button.
Okay, there we go.
There we go. Oh, it just exited the program, but go ahead and hit the present.
I got it. Go ahead.
Keep technical difficulty.
Keep going.
Okay. Anyway, just hit the next button down at the bottom.
I got it.
Once you get to it. Anyway, like they came in typically 3 parts, which was usually a tenor part would be the lower part, and then the upper parts were usually young boys. most of the time
Okay.
for a lot of this music. And sometimes they would just have adult groups, but they used boys and men for most of these chants. Okay, we're moving on to Renaissance.
Was that like Beowulf age music?
No, not quite. Beowulf is a little bit before, if I remember right.
Okay.
A lot of I don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure Beowulf was like a lot of epic poetry, and there's not much music recorded from that time.
Okay.
Unfortunately. Okay. Our next era is the Renaissance, and it's basically just a period of enlightenment, same for the music. So what started to happen was more instruments got to be invented. There were new genres that were coming out of music, and that's a big difference between era versus genre. We're talking about eras, which are periods of time where music was a certain way. Genres are little parts inside of an era that are like different forms of music. So in this era, we have genres like madrigals, masses, and motets. Basically, they have forms that make them the way they are, and that's the reason they are called what they are. We'll get into that more specifically when we talk about theory. So at this point, music was really kind of religious before this. It was used for a lot of religious purposes. That doesn't mean there wasn't secular music, which is music for people who it's music that's crowd-pleasing, music that's not focused on God and religion, not on worship, but for enjoyment. And that was not as common in the medieval era, so the Renaissance era is when secular music really started to thrive. There were more instruments, like I said, there were more instruments, and harmony began to become more of a thing, and harmony started to blend together a little bit more. They made more sense. It wasn't just like weird parts on top of one another. They started to make more sense. And this is the first time we actually kind of get to name some real composers. There were important composers of the medieval era, but they aren't really like anybody super memorable. So we really start to get into our first composers during the Renaissance. And Josquin is kind of known for a lot of his instrumental works, and then William Byrd is a British composer who is known for his madrigals. Okay, so this following video is a motet. It's a secular work, so it's about, if I remember right, I'm not sure exactly what it's about. I'm going to turn it up a little bit, Aaron. Actually, I take it back. It's not a secular one. It's Latin, and Latin's a typically religious language. It's used for sacred purposes. So this is probably a motet used for worship, would be my guess. So yeah, that gives you an idea. You guys have any questions about Renaissance music? That's okay. We'll have to exit out again.
Make sure not to click that.
It's a little bit of a pain, but
yeah.
Come on. There we go. All right. Okay. So any questions before we move on?
Nope.
Oh, okay. Next up, if we can get the mouse to work.
Did it die?
No,
it died.
It didn't die. It's good. Here, you kind of have to have the magic touch. Okay, come on. Come on, mouse. Come on, mouse. No, it's not dead. There we go. Okay.
Okay, there
Please
we
don't
go.
die on me, mouse. Okay, this next era is the Baroque era, and I'm sure you all have heard of the Baroque era. You may not be familiar with the name, but I'm definitely sure you're familiar with it. It's kind of back when the monarchs of Europe were a big deal. So think like lots of gold, lots of decorations, kind of over the top decorations that are almost to excess, that they're almost ugly. So characteristics of the music itself, it's very similar to the decorations. It's decorated, there's lots of trills and ornamental features that add toppings to kind of the main idea of the music. There's voices that split. Two parts can have very similar melodies, but they also end up being independent from one another, even though they're supportive. And the strings in this era become really super prominent. A lot of people begin writing for string orchestras. And then key signatures in written music as we know it are now commonplace. Like I told you about in the medieval era, they hadn't really done that. In the Renaissance era, even, it wasn't that common in this, but in the Baroque era, that's when it's really started to, okay, this is the standard, this is how we're going to write music. So before you click on this, some composers of note are Johann Sebastian Bach, kind of the father of the Baroque era. Then there's Handel and Vivaldi. And in this excerpt here, I want you to listen for instruments and tell me what you hear, and then see if you can hear where the trills come, and that kind of tells you like where phrases are ending, and it gives you a good idea of what's happening. That's it. You can leave that there if you want, or start it over. That works too. There's definitely a prominent instrument that I want you guys to notice. Yes, yeah. That's it. It's kind of got a twangy metallic sound. Mm-hmm. It's a very, very big marker of Baroque music. I mean, there's no other music
violin
like
and cello.
Violin, cello. Do you guys hear bass?
Yeah, a little bit of bass.
Yeah, there's going to be the 4 strings. You've got your bass, cello, violin, and viola. It's basically written in the way that you would write like choral music. Mm-hmm. There's 4 parts. So yeah, that was a big deal in the Baroque era. Okay. And did you hear kind of the trilly things? There's a lot of them in here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, those are a few postmarks of the Baroque era. Yeah,
Can you go up to that arrow at the top?
I think that replays it. Is it full screen?
You have to do that every single time. That's annoying.
Yeah, it is. I tested it. I thought I didn't do it last time. That's a little bit annoying.
Okay.
There we go. Okay, moving on. Next we have the classical era. Characteristics of the classical era, there's a much wider range of dynamic contrast when compared to the Baroque era. So basically what you're going to be hearing is, like in that last excerpt, you kind of hear how things kind of were on the same volume level most of the time. In the classical era, we start to kind of play with volume. We start to kind of like try to surprise people. You know, Mozart's Surprise Symphony, the dun 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 dun. They started writing music like that because they wanted to, like, people were getting kind of like, complacent listening to this music. They were just like, I've heard it before. Yeah. So yeah, they started to surprise them with volume. There were shorter melodies than the Baroque period. One movement in the piece could have multiple moods rather than just one. So it was more variety of keys and just mood. There's thicker texture of instruments because the orchestra is getting bigger, and no more harpsichord. It kind of fell out of style, which is unfortunate. And composers of note for this era are Beethoven, Mozart, and Haydn, all very famous names. I'm sure you guys know all of them. And this piece is a lovely piano work by Mozart.
That's one thing I did notice about the difference between Baroque and classical is a lot of Baroque music sounds the same.
Yeah. Classical is when we kind of start to get into a little more, like, it's a little more easy to, like, identify each composer because you can kind of tell what they're doing. They have a style. Not to say that the Baroque composers didn't have a style, but a lot of it was very similar.
Well, was that just, because they were limited in their instrumentation?
That's possible. I think it was just a new way of composing. Like, think about it. Beethoven, who was, like, one of the biggest guys who...
So if you go there, it won't...
Yeah, try that.
That's
share. Okay.
But yeah, Beethoven was one of the biggest guys to, like, pioneer music theory. So that's why the classical genre was the classical era was so much different from Baroque era. Much more elegant. Okay, we can continue. All right, we're into my favorite era. It's the Romantic era. Some characteristics of the Romantic era. There's more freedom of form and design. It's a lot more personal and emotional. It's romantic for a reason. It's very, like, pulls on your heart, and just like you can connect to it really well. Some of the most beautiful melodies in classical music are from the Romantic era because they just wrote really pretty melodies that often recurred, like they were themes that came back, and it was kind of like what the audience was waiting for. It's like you hear it at the beginning and then later you hear it again. It's like, oh, there's that theme again, something familiar. And it was all there were a lot of chromatic harmonies to kind of create tension. And you guys know what chromatic means, right?
Mm-hmm. Moving
John,
up and down.
you know what chromatic means? It's like steps.
Uh-huh.
Music moving up and down in steps. It's going up by accidentals and going down by accidentals.
Like pressing every key on the piano.
Yeah, exactly.
One after another.
Yep. And then we introduced more program music. Program music existed beforehand, but it really became popular in the Romantic era. Program music. Do you guys kind of have any clue what that might mean?
From like a ballet or something.
That's close, because what's in a ballet? Like, what is the idea?
Story.
Yeah, it's a story. So yeah, program music is it's a story. It's music that tells a story. When before we had music that was just kind of for the sake of music and for listening to music, but now we were really focusing on like what's it trying to tell us. And another big feature of the Romantic era was bigger, louder, brassier orchestras. They had just around this era started to invent the valve for brass instruments, so they started to use brass instruments a lot more. Some composers of note: Beethoven. I know we already mentioned Beethoven, but he overlaps from the classical era. And the interesting thing is the classical era actually dies with Beethoven. When Beethoven died, that's when the classical era ended. And then there's Brahms and Tchaikovsky, are two other composers famous for this era. And this excerpt is from Rimsky-Korsakov's Scheherazade. It's a very famous piece. I'm sure you guys have heard it. But yeah, can you guys kind of feel the weight of it? Mm-hmm. There's obviously a lot to be like said with the instrumentation. They're just kind of like introducing it in a really grand way, and then it kind of gets quiet, and they're trying to be more contemplative. So a lot more mood. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we probably should move on because we're running out of time, but I appreciate that you guys are interested in this music.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
The mouse is just moving down. Oh, come on. It's like right there.
It's
there
cool. You're good.
Okay.
Okay, moving on. All right. The 20th century modern era. I wrote here, music will never be the same after this period, and for good reason, because basically everything that we knew about the old traditions of music was completely changed by a lot of these composers. They wanted to do new stuff because everybody was getting kind of complacent with the classical music world. Nothing was new, so they tried to do a lot more new things. Melodies are often fragmented, dissonant, and experimental. Rhythms and time signatures will change quickly and can be kind of disjointed. Like, it's just hard to keep track of where the music is going. And there's forms, believe it or not, but it seems really shapeless, so it can be difficult to interpret. Some composers of note are Stravinsky, Aaron Copland, and Benjamin Britten. And this piece is a piece for strings and percussion by Bela Bartok. It's kind of quiet, so you might want to turn it up a little.
Just, stranger melodies.
Well, it's almost like there's no melody.
Mm-hmm.
It's very washy. There's not much shape to it. That's why a lot of people don't like 20th century music, because to them it's just noise. It's just, there's no shape. They want something with a more recognizable shape, but 20th century music is about breaking the shapes. Okay, last one is contemporary music. Now this won't be on the quiz. It's the quiz. It's just a little like it's a little like, you remember how I wanted you guys to kind of tell at the beginning how the eras come in order.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's all you gotta do. You just gotta list them in order, and it's really super easy. Okay, so this era won't be on there. You just have to list the first 6. what we know of music from 1975 to present day is the contemporary music. There are many genres of contemporary music, and much of the music we listen to today is contemporary. This is an example that we consider contemporary for the classical genre of music. Listen for electronic instruments and eclectic percussion elements. But yeah, since the invention of electronic instruments, we were able to do more stuff like this, which is pretty cool.
Uh-oh.
Oh, you're good. Okay, so yeah, that gives you an idea. Alright, so now we're going to move on to the Kia test. Just hit the escape button there and we're done for now.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, so you see that tab up there at the top where it says Kia?
Yes.
Yep, go and
If
click on
I-
that if you can get the mouse to move.
Dang mouse. That's so freezy. There we go.
Okay. Alright, so we're going to have you guys do it together just to save time.
Okay.
So what you got to do is number these from first to last.
Okay.
There are
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 7. I lied, not 6. Good.
4, 5, 6. Oh, wait. Is it? Oh, yeah, it's 6.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Because modern would mean now, so.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So.
You did it!
Yay!
Yay! All right, guys. Thank you. You were really good participants. I appreciate it. Thanks.